It was late, and Serenity was just sneaking out her window and into the pitch-black night. Dressed in a white tank top and a pair of shorts with her camera strapped to her waist, she was ready to head off to the factory. I hope I have enough film on me. I've got a terrible feeling about this place. She took the piece of toast that she laid on the windowsill and placed it in between her teeth before heading outside and hopping acrobatically over the railing on her porch. As she hit the ground, she bit the toast hard and inhaled the pieces, causing her to fall to her knees momentarily, covering her mouth tightly as she choked and coughed quietly as she could, with her hands wrapped tightly over her mouth. God, what a wonderful start to the night. She finally felt better after a moment and continued down the street, still coughing a few more times with her mouth closed. After about a half-hour walk, Serenity came upon the factory. It was a large place and seemed to have a few underground levels as well as a few upper ones. She could see the loading dock from where she was, as well as a large vent above it. There was also some scaffolding off to the left which she could use to climb up to the rafters to get to the vent. That's going to have to be my entrance, I guess. I just hope no one sees me up there. She hustled over to the scaffolding and quickly climbed up, hearing an 18-wheeler coming. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here and could probably get into trouble if caught, so she climbed up into the rafters and hoped that she wouldn't be seen. But there was another problem. The truck backed in, and the exhaust pipes for the truck were right beneath her, filling her air with thick, horrible diesel exhaust. Luckily, the truck was loud enough to muffle her long coughing fits. These trucks are awful. I can't take this anymore. After about a minute, the truck driver revved his truck in preparation to leave, causing even thicker exhaust to fill her lungs. She tried desperately to cover her mouth with a free hand, but to no real avail, as he pulled off and fresh air was finally given to her. I can taste the fumes. It's terrible. Thank goodness. Serenity finally reached the vent, climbing in and crawling through for a minute before reaching the end. It led her to an office covered in dust and drop cloths. There was a large window through which light was pouring into the room. Serenity began to crawl through this office towards the garbage chute to get to the floor below, but as she did, each move stirred up dust into her face that made her cough quietly. Don't they ever clean this room? She tried to crawl under a table to save about a minute of getting to the chute when she pulled the drop cloth off by accident, pouring dust all over her before the drop cloth blanketed her in the dust, causing the air to be little more than dry white powder. What else could go wrong? I can hardly breathe. Serenity finally pulled the cloth off of her and crawled into the chute, opening it and climbing in quickly, just as she heard a door open. So she braced herself, her head just below the chute door, instinctively looking up. Suddenly the chute door opened and an office worker dumped a vacuum bag of dirt and dust right into her face, causing her to immediately choke. Finally she heard the office door close, and she let go of the chute, falling into the dumpster below and letting loose wild coughing and gagging fits. Christ! That's horrible! Serenity was now in a small room with two doors, one leading outside and the other to the furnace. Well, I don't want to go back outside. I guess the furnace is my only option. Serenity was finally relieved of her coughing fits and went through the furnace door. It was smoky in this room, but after coughing so much she resisted the urge. A machine was fueling the fires with coal as she walked toward it, but she had to jump behind a pile of coal under a coal chute as a man walked into the room and then through another door on the left. Damn, did he see me? I haven't been able to take any pictures yet, and this place is so polluted. I can't get caught before I get some kind of evidence. Just as he walked through the other door, the chute above her rumbled and a large load of coal came tumbling down onto the pile that she was hiding behind, causing her to fall back and become partially covered. Soot filled the air so much that everything was obscured in a black haze as well as covering her body. She coughed and choked heavily while climbing out of the small pile. Oh my God! My lungs feel awful! Still coughing, she looked up at the chute, glaring, but saw a ladder heading up inside. There seemed no other way if there were people through the 2 doors in this level, so she decided to climb up, still coughing. My lungs feel so dirty. And I can taste the soot in my mouth. As she climbed, Serenity started to feel sick to her stomach, and when she reached the edge of the chute, she knew that she had little time before she would need to throw up. There was a door to the chute on the left, but an open space on the right, and she quickly opted for the open area and climbed up into the room, turning and coughing till she puked down the shaft. Without a word, she pushed herself to her feet and turned, wiping her mouth with a handkerchief in her back pocket and stumbling forward. I need to rest. She sat down for a minute, patting the camera on her hip to make sure it was still there, and looked down. My clothes! Oh no! That soot and garbage smell is never going to come out. Pounding her fist on the floor in frustration, Serenity stood and stormed forward, just barely noticing the condemned sign as the floor creaked beneath her and caved in. She fell for what felt like forever till she hit the ground, and being covered in old asbestos inhalation that filled the air in her lungs. She coughed and coughed, just laying on the floor with her mouth covered. I can't go on. I have to get home and rest. Serenity finished coughing and looked around, seeing a small window to her left and a door to her right. She opted for the window, deciding that she would come back and begin this adventure another day. Serenity had just taken her last picture, and the film in her expensive waterproof camera had almost run out, save for one final photo. This strange factory had always been an eerie place to her, especially since her last visit 2 nights ago. But this was ridiculous. What they were doing to the animals was inhumane and virtually torture. She had to get these photos to the sheriff's department. The only thing now was to her escape, and it hadn't been easy getting in there. Last time she'd attempted to infiltrate the factory, she'd felt suffocated from all the various pollutants that filled the place, even in what had just looked like an abandoned office space. Glad I decided to slip in behind that office worker this time, but I should have tried to lift his pass card. I didn't realize I'd be locked out of the offices once I slipped into the factory. She turned to move through the piping, but had to duck into a small area quickly as a man-operated cleaning machine came down the main aisle. She felt certain that she'd be caught, but the driver didn't see anything through the clouds of stuff being kicked up and blown out to the side, and unfortunately, right into Serenity's small hiding spot, filling her air and thus her lungs with dirt, dust, and some other kind of horrid-tasting chemical powder substance. She gagged, choked, and coughed terribly, throwing one arm around her face and the other hand rubbed her chest. Not again! Oh my God! My lungs! She could hardly breathe and felt herself coming close to vomiting. She continued to cough and retch a few times till the machine had passed and the air began to clear. Serenity finally opened her eyes, occasionally coughing, and just happened to notice her reflection in a shiny pipe next to her. She looked green and sick, and the combination of dirty substance now streaked itself across her beautiful face and nose, which she wrinkled inadvertently during a few small coughs. This night better not turn out like the last one. Serenity continued through the pipework, going over and under pipes, when she came to a section that she hadn't noticed before. There were a few pipes that crossed over and under that she'd have to crawl through the middle to get past. One of them was occasionally spraying a green gas in intervals. Great. More chemical crap, she said aloud before waiting for the next interval to stop. As soon as she did, she crawled quickly through the opening. Or tried. The gas suddenly sprayed without warning, straight into her nose and mouth, causing her to inhale out of surprise. She choked and coughed, rolling out of the little enclosure, covering her mouth with one hand and holding her aching stomach with the other. Christ! That gas is horrible! As she got up, Serenity wiped the condensed gas droplets off of her face and coughed herself into a slight gag, hawking up some of the green liquid that had pooled in her airways. What the hell did they use that stuff for? It tastes awful. Serenity slowly moved on, feeling sick and dizzy. She approached a few holding tanks filled with water that was spinning inside the glass. She walked up to an empty one and hung her head over the side, holding her stomach, and vomited, wiping her mouth afterward with her forearm. Slowly she stood up, feeling a little better, and moved toward the one that still had a little water at the bottom. She reached in to cup some into her hand, but as she leaned over the side of the glass, tons of water was spewed from a pipe that she hadn't seen above her. The force of the water pulled her into the tank. Then suddenly, the top of the tank was forced closed, trapping her inside with the water, now beginning to spin. Serenity tried desperately to hold her breath as she banged her fist against the glass repeatedly. Finally, she couldn't hold it any longer and inhaled 2 lungfuls of water. Her eyes got wide and her arm instinctively wrapped around her stomach as she coughed and choked silently into the water. After a full minute had passed, the water drained, leaving poor Serenity laying on the floor of the tank, coughing and spitting up water. What the hell was that? She helped herself up and out of the tank, falling over the side with a thud while coughing a few more times, and stumbling towards a small vent ahead of her. Serenity pulled the cover off the vent and climbed in quickly. This has got to lead outside, but something's not right. It smells like burning wood in here. She ignored it, however, and started crawling, figuring that she'd soon be out of this horrible place and headed home. As she began to crawl, the smell got more and more thick, turning into actual smoke. It was billowing into this vent, and soon there was little else to breathe except for the smoke, and it filled her lungs with each breath. Yet again she began to cough, her poor lungs aching and tormented. Her eyes began to tear, streaking ashy lines down her cheeks, yet she crawled on. I have to get out of here. Serenity finally reached the end of the vent and crawled out into a black room with some fresh air, most of the smoke traveling up into a vent off the ceiling. She stood up, placing her hands on her knees, bent over, coughing rapidly, causing small clouds of smoke and ash to be forced from her mouth before gasping for air. Air! Thank God! She felt sick again from all the coughing, but had to press on. She had to be almost out. Serenity noticed a small storm drain that she could barely slip into off in the corner of the room. She walked over to it, lifting off the cover. She could see daylight, so she quickly hopped in and began to crawl through the wet, smelly tunnel, leading her at a slightly downward angle. She crawled through it for almost a minute toward the daylight when suddenly she could hear rushing water. Oh no. Please no. It got closer and closer as she tried to crawl faster, but suddenly, dirty water rushed into the drain, filling it. Serenity tried to hold her breath, but her poor lungs couldn't handle it, and she inhaled 2 lungfuls of water. She felt like throwing up right there, being washed through the drain. The dirty water was also filling her stomach, making it feel more and more sick. Finally, she was thrown out of the drain and into a muddy water hole, where she coughed, gasped for air, and retched till she felt all right. It's over. I'm okay. Serenity lifted herself up and looked down at herself. Her white tank top was soaked, so she crossed her arms and walked home. Luckily, it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning, so there was no one out and about. When she finally got home, she took a shower, washing herself thoroughly, scrubbing all the grime and dirt off of her. She finally went to bed, wrapped in her clean sheets, and softly she let out a cough followed by a very whispery, tired moan. I'll get the pictures to the sheriff tomorrow. She rolled over and felt the urge to cough again, trying to suppress it, but she couldn't. As the coughing fit overcame her, she thought she could taste the chemicals in the factory. Then I'm going to the hospital.